This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Highball Graphics. For over 25 years, Highball Graphics has been providing high-quality decals for railroads in New England, Canada, and beyond. With over 2,000 sets in scales N through G, Highball Graphics has you and your project covered. Highball Graphics specializes in custom decal orders, serving freelance railroads worldwide. Check out their easy-to-use website at highballgraphics.com or email them at info@highballgraphics.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, so glad you could join us. Coming to us from Green Bay, Wisconsin, the one, the only, Mike Ostertag. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here. And it feels like I just talked to you, but I just saw you last night on the Second Section podcast and watched that show. So it's just kind of like a continuation of last night, except for instead of sitting there chatting, I'm actually talking to you. So glad to have you here on the show. Yeah,
this has been kind of a crazy couple of days. It's going to be it's always fun to do stuff back to back sometimes like this. The podcast is really kind of a lot of fun, and then it's going to be interesting to get interviewed. I never get interviewed by anybody, so this is going to be fun.
Oh, this will be good. And a show that you and I mutually enjoy, which is Shoresy. And what do they say in Shoresy? 2 is a streak, so we're on a streak.
2 is a streak.
2 is a streak.
2 is a streak.
So there we go. And you, that was actually kind of cool. You know, Shoresy is a show done by the creators of Letterkenny. And all really hockey based and a lot of fun. And you actually got to go to Sudbury and kind of see some of those spots. I was really jealous to see those pictures.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting when I was trying to get into the country into Canada, and the border agent asked what I was doing trying to go to Canada, and I said I'm on a beer run. And he kind of looked at me weird, and things progressed from there. Let's just leave it at that.
I can imagine so. But you somehow got through that, and you got yourself up to Sudbury, and I think you even had yourself a pitter patter panini. So
I did. I got to meet Tyson. I actually got to be friends with him on Facebook now, and Ray Berlin, I think his name is. Super nice, or a super nice guy. Jay Berlin. Yeah, okay. He's a super nice guy. And everybody up in Canada was so nice, So yeah, definitely going to get back up there one of these days.
Yeah, definitely. I love looking at Google Maps and finding all the stuff they reference in the show. But you got to see that, and looking forward to season 2 of Shoresy. But enough hockey show talk. We'll get into model railroading, the stuff that keeps us entertained, along with that. So, I'm looking forward to, because we all know, if anybody knows anything about Mike Ostertag, we know the words S-scale are going to work our way in there. We haven't talked S-scale yet on Around the Layout, so I'm really interested into finding out how you got into S-scale, and we'll talk about all the pros and cons of S-scale and in the entire story. But let's start in the beginning, get to know Mike Ostertag a little bit more. Tell us how your journey in the model railroading game began.
Well, my journey isn't very typical. It's okay. So I come from I'm a family railroad guy. I should say second generation. My dad worked for the Milwaukee Road in the early 70s and 80s. And instead of getting, like a lot of people that I've heard on the show, you get the Christmas tree train or the Lionel train or whatever you want to call it. And, they go from there with the 4x8 sheet of plywood and stuff. My dad actually, when I was 5 years old, asked me, hey, I need to go down to the yard office for a second. Do you want to come with? All right, not a problem. Never thought of anything about it. And I couldn't tell you any of the cars. I couldn't tell you what the engines were. I couldn't tell you any of that stuff. I mean, I was 5, but a train had showed up on the main line, and we parked the car, and he said, well, before I come in here, let me show you this. And he goes and takes me up to the up to the car, and they went and they cut away, and the air dumped on the train, you know, and I jumped back and I looked at my dad and I said, make them do it again. Make them do that again. That was cool. Make them do that again. And ever since that moment when I was 5 years old, I was hooked on trains. Anytime he'd ask me to go down there, I would go with him. I got to know a lot of the guys that worked with him. And then ironically in my career, I'm a locomotive engineer for Canadian National now. Mm-hmm. But over the course of my career, those same guys that knew me as a kid, I worked with as their engineer at one point or as their brakeman at one point in my life, in my career. So it really got to be a big family thing. And model trains never really came into any of it until I was about 8 or 9. And one day my dad went on a train down to Milwaukee and came back. And when he came back, he had these blue boxes. And he came up to me and said, here, these are for you. I brought these from a hobby shop down in Milwaukee. And I looked at it and and I still have, I think I have the majority of them. They were Athearn blue box, little 2-bay hoppers, coal hoppers, and they were Milwaukee Road, Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific on the side. And every trip down, one day he'd come back, he had a Milwaukee Road engine, and then the next time he'd come back, he had a caboose and things like that. And I never got the 4x8 sheet of plywood. He went out and bought I want to say the track plan was in one of the versions of 101 track plans you can build. Okay. And it was, we ended up making half of a ping pong table and like 2 4x8 sheets of plywood and it was like this grandiose figure 8 type thing, and he had a yard in there and all sorts of stuff, and there was like a little cubby alcove in one corner where you could stand and like watch the trains come down the hill and make the inevitable hard left-hand turn to go, and of course, me being a kid, I didn't know anything about centrifugal force at that point. Right. So you can just imagine these things. He'd go down to Milwaukee, bring me a car, it ends up on the floor, those kind of things. Yeah. And eventually that started as I got older. I started to like see things differently. I started to actually see the railroads for what it was right about the time I was in middle school or so. I started realizing, there's more to this than that. And I started looking at, I didn't build a layout, and my dad had gone from the Milwaukee Road at this point, let's see, to the Escanaba and Lake Superior Railroad. And it was interesting because at our house, I just went out and started watching things. But of course, my really good friend, my best friend growing up, Chris Crabb, I got to say this, him and I would almost on a daily or every other day basis would take our bikes and ride down to the location called Tavel in Green Bay, which is where the Milwaukee Road and the Chicago Northwestern crossed. And we'd just sit there and watch trains. And this was back in the 80s where if you told your mom you were going to be on a bike ride, okay, have fun. As long as you didn't come back bloody, everything was fine, right? Yep. So, or followed by the cops, one of those. But it was one of those situations where, of course, we went and watched all these trains. It never brought a camera, never thought about any of those, never thought about the history of those things or it was one of those thoughts that, this will always be there. Sure. Right. And now it's down to one track and it's one railroad and it's all gone. And I have some pictures that I took as I got older, like when I got a car and things like that, but it was not the same as like had I done it when I was younger. Right. Remember the old 110 cameras, those little thin 110 cameras. I'd spend $5 and I'd go get one of those and I'd carry it with me. And if I saw something, I'd take a picture of it. And
Sure.
that's about it, Yeah. So as time grew on, I kind of made a couple of pseudo shelf type layouts, kind of something more in the middle of the basement that just kind of still made a giant oval. Didn't really have any kind of organization to it. Mm-hmm. But I would look at magazines and I'm terrible with names. I'm horrible with names. Your name, you are, yeah. I know.
I had to put mine's up on the screen for you. Just
yours
so
is on
remember.
The screen. Yeah, I know. but the thing is like I'd look at Model Railroader and Railroad Model Craftsman, and I'd see Alan McClellan, the Virginia and Ohio, and I'd see the Utah belt. The Utah belt was at that time I didn't understand how to appreciate what Alan McClellan did or was doing at that point. Mm-hmm. I just looked at the Utah belt and thought, that's what I want. I want to do something like that. That looks really cool.
Yeah.
That looks like what I see out in real life. And I could associate better with that than I could with the Virginian and Ohio or any of the other railroads that were out there at the time. And slowly but surely, I started trying to put pieces of the puzzle together. And it still to this day blows me away sometimes when I go and I look at what some of those guys did back in the day, especially with the resources that they had.
Yeah.
I have such an appreciation for those guys, and unfortunately, it's too bad we don't have Alan around anymore. But I mean, so you had guys like I look at Eric Broman's Utah belt and say, I have to mimic this, and how can I do that? And then I just kept on going down one rabbit hole after another, after another, after another. And that's probably why I am the way I am today.
kind of set the tone as to the way things were going to go in the future. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned, the resources that you had to have, and, you talk about Alan McClellan and Eric Broman and all these guys in the past building these layouts. And it's like, they didn't have an internet. They didn't have voice stuff like we do. I mean, it was like they had to, it was like coming up on this in a much harder way. You had to know somebody that knew what the answer was, versus now we just type in a simple thing and we can find an answer with the click of the mouse.
And like the magazines back then were invaluable, like Railroad Model Craftsman and Model Railroader. Was it Model Railroader that had the CTC deal on them, where they could do code, where you could actually put the codes into your computer to do certain things, and they would actually have the line codes that you could put in. It was one of those two magazines had that, and I always thought that was kind of neat. Oh boy, the computers. One of these days, I'll do something with that maybe. And I'm sitting here going, well, how many years later, and look at us. We do a lot more than those computers back then. We have more power in our hands and our phone than those guys did on those computers, and they were doing incredible. But Bruce Chubb is another one I meant to say, in the Sunset Valley, is that the name of his railroad? But that was another one that was pretty inspirational. But I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but it's inevitably high school, girls, cars.
Sure.
1986 comes around. I get my car. The Milwaukee Road has gone into history, and on December 31st of 1985, and here I am with a car and a camera. And do you think I go and take pictures of all the stuff that was going on in Green Bay with all the Milwaukee Road stuff floating around? Nope. I was too busy doing other things, and it never dawned on me until about 1987 or 88. I was a senior in high school, and they had these career things that, and they were canned. It was like a canned thing where they really wanted to push you to go to college, and they wanted to, that was kind of, you were going to be something in life if you went to college.
Right.
And they came up to me and said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I'm going to work for the railroad. I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to go work for the railroad."
Right.
That's what I'm going to do. And it didn't happen right away, right out of high school. But in 1990, I went and I applied, and I got hired on to the Wisconsin Central. And 1991, and that was April of 90. In May of 90, I quit. There was just something that was telling me it wasn't the right time, and the way they were kind of going through their training process at the time was really old school, and I didn't really know how to handle it.
Yep.
And it was I wasn't mature enough to understand what these guys were trying to explain to me. And so it was a situation where I just needed something, and then the first Gulf, Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield started up, and I went into the Air Force for a short period of time as well. You're starting to see a pattern here. I went into the military. I was an air transportation specialist, and I never left the state of Texas. I went to basic training in San Antonio. Went to technical training up in Wichita Falls, and my 3 station locations that I wanted were Almendorf Air Force Base in Alaska, Reykjavik, Iceland, and K.I. Sawyer up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is the closest Air Force base to my house, which I already knew that they were closing, but I just put it on there anyway.
Yep.
And I got Kelly Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas. So I made a straight line. I went from San Antonio to Wichita Falls back to San Antonio.
Yeah.
And when I got there, I started getting bored, and I realized I went out and drove around for a little bit one day, and I'm like, oh, there's a railroad yard. And the Union Pacific had a yard right at towards the end of one of the runways. And it was a big yard. And the Southern Pacific actually had their main line, the 2 main lines for the UP and the SP kind of paralleled each other for a little while. And I really got into rail fanning the SP and the UP, and as well as a couple of short lines, Austin and Northwestern, I think it was, down in Austin, Texas. And that's where I started getting into the trains heavy. Every opportunity I had, I was getting out with a camera or a video camera. I'd go and rent. You could rent the VCR cameras, and they weren't the small ones. They were the ones that you needed half a coal car worth of, electricity.
Yeah.
And you were carrying it.
Yep.
You had to be Arnold Schwarzenegger in order to carry it around, and all you're trying to do is for this little tape.
Yeah, massive battery packs and
the huge battery packs.
Sure.
And it was really a lot of fun, and I wish I had known about photography skills and things like that, and videography and things like that back then. But then again, this is the early 90s. Things like that just weren't the thing. We still haven't even gotten to internet stuff yet. That was still not, there was no graffiti on anything. Mm-hmm. You didn't even have graffiti on stuff.
Yeah.
But when I came home, I actually got out of the military early. I took a voluntary buyout because they were reducing the size of the military.
Yep.
And they were giving away severance checks, and I said, well, I'll take my money and I'm going to drive back home. And if my car makes it that far, great.
Yep.
Because my car I had a little Ford Tempo, and that thing was a piece of crap. Mm-hmm. But I make it back as far as I can. If not, wherever I break down, I actually literally said that to my mom, and she's like, all right, whatever. And I made it all the way home, and I was sitting there going, now what? And then I decided to give the railroad a try, and I had this book on, what's it called? No, it's the Shortline Railway Guide or something along those lines. It was like a little 4-inch by 8-inch or 4 by 11-inch or 10-inch book. Kallenbach put them out there. I think I have almost all of them that they ever made. There was like a diesel spotter's guide and things like that. There were all sorts of things like that. And I started thumbing through this Shortline one, and I started looking at addresses, and I started cold calling railroads, asking if they were hiring.
Yeah.
And one railroad said, yes, we are hiring, and it was Dakota Rail, and out in Hutchinson, Minnesota. Okay. So I packed up the car and headed out to Hutchinson, and I was a laborer there, and for a couple of months in 1991, and then no, I take that back. It was 1992. Yeah, that was 1992, and then I went and I hired out after a couple of months on Dakota Rail. I hired out on the Burlington Northern as a regulator operator.
Okay.
And so I not really going to get into detail on it, but the Burlington Northern and myself agreed to mutually part ways. How's that sound?
Is that employee file sealed at this point? Is that what we're talking about? That employee file
is for a Around the Layout After Dark show. Is what that one is.
Oh boy.
So then I came home.
Yeah.
And I'm believe it or not, I was working for a meat packing plant for a little bit and doing nothing but cleaning out hide trailers. It was a disgusting job. Ooh. Yeah, but I met my wife. She became my girlfriend.
Yeah.
And I thought, I kind of like this girl. No. I should probably try to take care of her a little better than doing this. Yeah. I'm going to see if I can get hired on the railroad again. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because the guy, I guess, was just a good guy, but the Green Bay and Western had a fatality and needed somebody right away. And I happened to be at the right place at the right time, and they hired me. And I was a brakeman on the Green Bay and Western starting in September of 1992. And I guess the rest you could say is kind of history with mergers and things like that. Wisconsin Central became an engineer in 1996, and then 2001 Canadian National, and now I'm over 30 years on the railroad, and
yeah,
so.
You had mentioned earlier.
Oh yeah.
Well, you had mentioned earlier about your dad, and I was just kind of curious because you said the Milwaukee Road went away, and you're in that second generation railroader. How was your dad able to finish out a career with Milwaukee Road, or?
No. He at one point he ended up going to working in Wausau. At one point, the Milwaukee Road, like doing something what they call cutting the board. They cut the board, so they reduced the number of people in the terminal. Yeah. And his seniority, he couldn't hold Green Bay anymore with his seniority. So the options for him were Davenport, Iowa, Three Forks, Montana, or Wausau, Wisconsin.
Okay.
Those were the three spots. And my dad wanted to go to Three Forks, Montana in the worst way. He wanted to just pick up and go.
Yep.
And my mom said, you're going to Wausau. And so he went over to Wausau for a little while, got tired of driving back and forth. And he was away. He had left the Milwaukee Road and went to the Escanaba and Lake Superior, I believe, in 1984 or 85, just before the Sioux line took over. So he he went over that way, but he was able to work out of the Green Bay. So that's part of the reason he could stay in Green Bay doing that. So
okay, but was he able to? He had a full career in railroading. Retired out of it, or did he leave it, or no?
No, him and the Wisconsin Central kind of had a similar agreement as I did with the Burlington Northern at one point. Yeah, it was. There actually, in all honesty, in actuality, that actually was a little bit of some sour grapes for me for a little while I was on the WC. I would actually use that as some personal fodder when certain managers would get on me. I'd be like, "Oh, so you guys want to do to me what you did to my dad? That's fine." Boy. Oh, yeah, you can't say that. That's something completely. That wasn't what was going on. I'm sitting there going, "Nah, I know what was going on," but no, he ended up driving truck for up until about 5 years ago.
Oh, wow.
He's 81. So he drove truck right into his mid 70s.
Oh, wow.
He
Good
drove
for him.
truck. Yeah. And he's still around. He's still out there driving my mom nuts,
Well, he's got something to do. He's got
a hobby at least.
He's got a reason. Yeah. So, well, that's excellent. But your railroad career's, underway. And, how does the model railroading start to tie back in? I mean, and that kind of leads to another question, I guess, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but does it take away when you become a railroader? How does it affect? Like, does it become more of a chore because you're an active, you're working for the railroad, and obviously you're modeling, but like I couldn't imagine doing my full-time job and then coming home and making emulating it a hobby. So how does that kind of lay out for you? Yeah. I mean, sure you do.
It's one of those things where a lot of railroaders have hobbies that other than model railroading. It's getting more prevalent, but it's not hunting, fishing, cars. It's all that kind of fun stuff. But how it ties back in is I started looking at. I don't want to go out drinking. I don't want to go doing this. I need something to do that I'm at home with. I have all this information. I should do something with it. And so I started looking at what do I want to do? And so Milwaukee Road always comes back into stuff, right?
Right.
Well, I'll do some, I want to do this part of the Milwaukee Road, the Milwaukee Road portion that my dad was on. I'm going to do that.
Sure.
So I tried doing something like that and I'd get bored with it because I couldn't do it the way I wanted to. I just didn't have the skill or the knowledge or what have you at the time. And granted, I'm in my, mid to late 20s at this point, and I'm kind of, I've got squirrel syndrome so bad that it's, at least that's what my wife says. She goes, you can look at one thing and go on a tangent completely at a 90-degree left turn. And like Bill Engvall said at one point, his wife says, you just got to take that little journey with them. Yeah. We'll get back to this, but we just got to go over here for a few minutes and we'll come back. But
I think we all do. We kind of get off the interstate a little bit, maybe go off the off ramp. The trick is not to take the right hand turn and go off into the woods and then get lost and never come back to the highway again.
You got to make sure there's a road there if you're going to do it, right? You just don't want to go plow into a tree or something, But no, I really just started looking at. I actually started just getting as much Milwaukee Road stuff as I possibly could. I'd go to a hobby shop. I'd see something Milwaukee Road. That would be the only thing I would buy, not thinking of the other 85 cars that are in a train that are not Milwaukee Road. Everything has to be Milwaukee Road. And so I would go and do that. And then I'd get bored with it because I would see What's that engine? Oh, that's kind of neat. Let me take a look and see what that is. And I'd start looking it up in books. Oh, that's a GP35. That's whatever. Mm-hmm. So I started collecting all this information about all these railroads. And I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to do a model railroad, I should just make my own. These guys are in these magazines that do it.
Yeah.
That I should do that. And so I created the Wisconsin and Midwestern.
Okay.
And it's always had there's been 2 versions of this railroad. It's never been built.
Yeah.
I've built all sorts of power and I've painted all sorts of things for it. The layout itself has never existed.
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys.
Yep. I know a few, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you look at the state of Wisconsin, everything either goes north-south or directly east-west, right? The Milwaukee Road came from Milwaukee, Chicago, Milwaukee, and went up through kind of on an angle towards the Minneapolis, St. Paul. The Green Bay and Western went directly east-west. The Chicago Northwestern and the Milwaukee Road also went directly north-south. Okay. So I thought, I'm going to create a railroad that goes from Green Bay to Dubuque, Iowa. I'm going to cut the whole state right on an angle, right like that. That'll be perfect. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a reason nobody's ever built a railroad that way. Okay. It would, let's just say that I don't know even to this date that there'd be enough engineering technology to be able to pull it off.
Right.
It is everybody kind of thinks that Wisconsin is flat and everything, but we have some really neat glacial land masses that have, where the glacier never got to, that are really hilly and bluffs and stuff like that. And the farther south and the west you get, the more prevalent that is. And some of them are they're gorgeous to drive through. There's no way you could build a railroad through them. Yeah. I mean, you'd have to put 12 miles of track just to go 1 mile in length. It's one of those kind of things.
Yeah, one of those you can't get there from here kind of thing.
Yeah, so. Yeah, you can, but it's not going to be pretty.
Right.
So I started doing the freelance railroad thing, and so that way I could do, if I wanted a GP28. I'm one of those guys that I like the eclectic. I want a GP28 or an SD28 or I'll make up my own convoluted locomotive of some sort and just see what it looks like. And I'd do that, and then I'd get bored doing that.
Yep.
And I'd go back to doing the Milwaukee Road. And everything I was doing, then I'm like, oh man, I got all this stuff from Wisconsin Midwestern. Now I got to paint all this stuff back to Milwaukee Road. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. And then I'd go back to the Wisconsin and Midwestern. And, oh, hey, there's the Mopac. Oh, the Mopac's good. Do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I have a friend. We kind of pick a little bit on him on the show a little bit too. And we've mentioned his name. He'll be listening for sure. Joe Mammy. And I call it, and he struggles through the same thing, but I call it he's open-minded to a fault, right?
Oh,
like he just likes so many things and is so open-minded about what he wants that it does happen. Like he'll be set on one, and then and it really is a kind of thing. Like where do you decide when you love so many different things?
And that's the problem, right? And now that comes back into my career to where I'm running SD45s. I'm running. And I've ran, and I'm proud to gloat about this. I am one of the few people in the hobby that can actually say I've run every single SDL 39 that was in existence, with the exception of the 581, because that never made it to the WC. Yep. But I physically ran every SDL 39 that was made. Awesome. They were awesome engines. I love those things. The 587 was my favorite. And, it's just one of those things where I just started gravitating towards the odd and I wanted to just keep modeling the weird stuff and the odd stuff because everybody was doing the cookie cutter stuff. Everybody had SD40-2s. Everybody had GP40-2s. Everybody had all this stuff. And I wanted to be different.
Right.
You know, I pretty much accomplished that, you know, but, and for the most part, a lot of my friends that I would make at the local model railroad club, a lot of them are still my friends to this day. They still tease me about, oh, tags changing. Oh, here we go. Wait a minute. The wind is blowing a different direction. If better look out, Tag's going to start changing his mind on doing something else. And that's okay. I'm all right with that. It got a little irritating for a little while, but I kind of see it as a compliment because I've got a really broad scope. I don't have the tunnel vision of, well, I can only look at this and this thing. I can look at anything and find something useful and to use out of it, you know?
Yeah. I think that that plays into one of the segments we'll talk about with the second section podcast with the short line of the show. And I think now I'm starting to understand why you have that interest. We'll talk about that a bit later, but you did mention about a model railroad club. When did you get involved with that?
Oh, it was the Green Bay Area Model Railroad Association. I think that was the name of it. Yeah, I think that's still the name of it. Mm-hmm. But it's, I must have been 17 years old when I first got involved in it. And it was one of those clubs that it was good. They had a nice layout. They were done at the National Model Railroad Museum in a depot down there. They had a nice size layout. It was the late 70s, early 90s construction techniques, and nobody ever thought of trying to figure out how to you build something for operations. Everything was glorified running in circles, you know, but I learned quite a bit from those guys, especially I learned a lot of how not to do things more than what to do with things. You know, and again, it was one of those things where as I went on in my life and my career or my modeling, I would go back and I'd realize, oh, wait a minute, I've seen that done before. That's not a good idea.
Yeah.
No, let's not do that way. But the club itself it's a good club. They're nice. There's a lot of nice people down there. A lot of youth, quite a bit of youth in that club. You know, matter of fact, my best friend's son and some of his friends are all part of it. And my old conductor's son is a member down there, and they go down there and they're great modelers. Yeah. So it's kind of neat. It's kind of neat to see all the young guys into it nowadays.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'm a proponent of clubs, and especially if you're getting started in the hobby, there's so much you can take away. And like every layout, whether it be a club or a private layout, there's so many. There's pros and con takeaways. You know, it's like, oh, I see this now, and I know that for me, I don't like this, so I can, you know, take that back and say, okay, cross that one off the list. Or in the other side of things, you go there and you collect ideas and maybe you modify them or twist them a little bit. But yeah, there's always a great takeaway from seeing other railroads. Yeah,
and it's one of those situations where, you know, the club aspect is a really good way to kind of get your core group started, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the core guys, the guys that I've met at the club all those years ago, and we still have our core group of guys that we still do stuff, you know, and with social media and being what it is, we have our own little group, you know, off to the side group chats and things like that, where if somebody has an issue, you know, we'll you know, throw the question out there and say, hey, you know, has anybody had problems with these decoders, or are you guys having issues with power drops, or, you know, whatever, you know, and it's one of those things where, you know, you start kind of like what you got with your little operating group that you have, you know, it's that core group that those friendships are lifelong friendships, and they're really, you learn a lot from those people that you wouldn't learn if you were on your own,
Yeah.
So
let's fast forward a little bit, because we making sure that we keep on time here. We certainly would be remiss without asking about how this whole S-scale thing kicked in and how you got kicked over to there. So tell us how you get led to, because I imagine all the stuff that you've done before and what you've told us is likely in the HO scale. So what was your introduction to this S-scale thing, and how did that all begin?
I have absolutely no idea.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, not a problem. No, so there was, the life of me, I can't remember the name of the layout or the article, but I remember seeing a Model Railroader one time, an S-scale layout, and I thought, well, that's pretty cool. That's, whatever, S-scale, whatever. Yeah. And then, so I'm going through HO, working kids.
Yep.
And all of a sudden one day I'm trying to work on something in HO, and I'm like, why won't my hands close? So I'm like, uh-oh. And I'm starting to have, I didn't have arthritis. There was something else was going on. Still to this day, I have no idea what it was. But I was having a lot of pain in my hands, and my hands wouldn't, I couldn't, grip my thumbs. I couldn't do this.
Okay.
And with my fingers, I couldn't grip or touch my thumbs with my fingers. Oh. And it was just, I could get close, but I couldn't make a full fist or whatever. And I thought, if I'm going to keep modeling, I got to find something else. And at that point I had decided I'm going to be building a shelf layout, and I started putzing around with shelf layouts in my basement. And, I thought, what's the next scale up from HO? Mm-hmm. And I went and I found it. It was S scale, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, I'm gonna buy a set and just see what it's like. So I bought an S scale train set, which was totally out of character because I knew nothing about it. So I just kind of went in at the most basic level, kept all my HO stuff, and lo and behold, I didn't really like it too much. And then, so I kind of pawned off this to this guy and this to this guy and this to this guy, and went back to HO for another year or so. And then all of a sudden my hands started getting hurt, feeling that pain again in them. And I thought, nope, I've got to try this S-scale thing again. And I want to say it was about 8 or 9 years ago is when I actually said, I'm just going to go with this and go this way.
Yeah.
And I started selling off my HO scale stuff and buying S scale stuff, and I love it. It's made me such a better modeler. And one of the biggest reasons is because I got tired of taking things out of a box. That was another thing too, because I mean, HO scale, I'm going to really make some people mad by saying this. Man, okay. First of all, I love y'all, okay? I have no problems with HO scale whatsoever. But
remember that hate mail goes to the guys in the second section. Don't send it to aroundthelayout@gmail.com.
Yep.
If you do, I will just forward it on to Mike. So now we've got
care of Andy Dorsch.
Yeah, Andy Dorsch. Yep. Attention, Andy Dorsch. Yeah. So now we've got that primer place. Go for it.
In HO scale, there isn't a lot of modeling being done. It's basically because the manufacturers are doing everything for the hobbyist as far as detailing. A lot now they're coming out with pre-weathered cars. They're doing all sorts of stuff. The cars are gorgeous. They are beautiful. They are $60 to $80 a piece. And you take them out of the box, you put them on a layout, and that's the end of what you do with that car as a general rule. They come with couplers on them, or Katy couplers as a rule already. Depending on the aero that you're modeling. I mean, and in HO scale, they have everything. I mean, HO is king. I mean, it's,
and especially today, because there's a plethora of manufacturers, including a lot of cottage industry, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
There's a lot of availability on HO components.
There's a ton of availability. Sure. And so I kind of felt myself going down that path where all I'm doing is taking things out of a box. And I really wanted to be a modeler. Mm-hmm. And S-Scale allows me to do that. I don't have a choice. I have to create. I have to think outside of conventional thought processes sometimes in order to accomplish what I want to. I decided for some reason, probably because was off my medication for a little while, to hand lay my entire layout. So I got away from commercial track. Now I do nothing but hand lay everything, and I love it. It is some of the best therapy I've ever thought I'd ever have. If I'm having a bad day, I come downstairs and I throw on a little bit of Letterkenny or a Shoresy show for white noise in the background, right. And I'll just sit there and I'll spike 3 feet worth of track, and I'll feel a lot better about things than I did when I went into it. And it's just modeling wise, I just really can dive into one project and just let my mind go all in on that project without distraction.
I think the key piece that you said, I mean, in defense of HO, I mean, those are things you can do in HO. And I think the key piece is that S-Scale forced your hand to actually have to do it. You had no excuse, no way out, no going back. You physically had to do this stuff because there were no other options.
And I'm a research geek. Yep. I love doing research. I love trying to figure out the hows and the whys and the whats and whatever. So if I come up with an idea for something, my first thing is, are there drawings? If there are drawings, how can I get these drawings? How can I do this and this? So I'm actually kind of going back to the old school way of doing things to a certain degree. No, don't get me wrong. We have some ready to run stuff in S-Scale, and it's gorgeous, and I have a whole bunch of it. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times I'll strip some of those and then make a car that I want, or I'll modify those cars to be closer, because my layout is a small little last mile type of short line railroad. Yep. My trains are only 4 cars long, and so I can have more detail and fewer cars with higher grade of detail to them, but I'm doing all the detail work.
Right.
So, it's a lot of satisfaction and a lot of pride. Sometimes I stand back and I'm like, wow, I can't believe I just did that.
Yeah, I made that.
I made that. Wow.
You ever do a project and then walk away, or say you do a project and then 2 or 3 years later, I know at least I'm getting this way. I go back and I can't even remember how I did it.
My God, absolutely.
I did that. How I can't even remember.
Yeah. I just did that. I just built a warehouse and I followed Boomer's. Thank God Boomer's got Boomer from Boomer Diorama. Thank God he's got his stuff on video so I can go back and look at it, because I have no idea how I painted it. It looks awesome, but I have no idea how I painted that warehouse. I couldn't tell you the colors I used, none of that. And I'm sitting there going, I really should start writing some of this stuff down.
It gets a little scary too. You look at it and go, man, I did that. Yeah, I know I did it, but I don't remember doing it. It's crazy. But
or you pick something up and you're like, what the heck is this for? And then you turn around and you're like, oh, that goes with that.
Yeah, that's why I bought all that stuff.
Yeah, that's crazy. What that's all for. Yeah.
So I think you kind of hit on it, but I'll ask the question too. We talk about some of the challenges of S-Scale. You said there is some out there, but not all. And as much as you try to hit up on some of these manufacturers and pick on them like Jim Wiggin at Athearn. You always try to drop in a comment on poor Jim about S-Scale. What are some of the bigger challenges that you find within that? I mean, do you have a good support group? That I guess is part of my other question too. I mean, we know that there's like 3 other S-Scale modelers in the world,
yeah,
exactly.
there's only 3 of us. Yeah.
So.
First of all, Jim Wiggin is an amazing sport, and it makes me crack up every Tuesday when I watch his show to see him actually respond, because for you guys that don't know out there, what I do is he'll come up with Athearn has come out with this new product, and first thing as soon as he says a new product, I'm one of the first guys on there that goes, make that an S-Scale.
Yeah.
Make that an S-Scale. And I won't do it just once. I'll do it like 2 or 3 times. And then he's actually starting to respond on a show to it, because I think it's kind of gotten to be a running gag. So
sure.
It's, I've always said S-Scale needs an Athearn, and I told him that, and it does.
Yeah.
But as far as the support group goes, I mean, I have some really close friends. Ken Ziska, we know Ken very well.
Yep, from
the Crossing Gate podcast. Ken Ziska, there's Ben Truesdale. He's a good friend of mine. One of my best friends in the hobby and actually in life too. Robert Frischella. He's is an incredible S-Scale modeler. He's just an incredible model railroader, period. He's an artist to boot, and it's just ridiculous. His talent is out way beyond anything I could ever hope to accomplish. But there's a really good core group. We have several of our guys, and every one of us has taken like a little piece of the hobby and kind of trying to make little niches out of it.
Yep.
And one of the things is the gentleman by the name of John Deegan, he's going through with another company and making these really true to life, like a Sargent type coupler. And they're gorgeous. They're absolutely beautiful. Myself and Robert Frischella, we have developed several different body shells for like GP38-2s, GP40s. I've measured countless parts on a GP38-2 and sent the measurements to Robert, and then he goes and puts them on the computer and makes CAD drawings, and we have them 3D printed. And so there's a lot of little pieces. Ben Truesdale just came out with a car that's never been done in S-Scale, a Pullman Standard 4750 covered hopper. And these things are just, everything is starting to take shape. And so eventually the manufacturers will get on board with it, because it's kind of the Wild West of model railroading, really. But I mean, it's the community is really tight knit and it's a really good community.
If Athearn were to call you right now and the phone rings and they say, Mike, we're going to make one thing, we're going to tool it up in S-Scale. What is that one big needed thing in the S-Scale community for them to make? What would your request be?
GP38-2.
Okay.
Without question. Yep. We have a gap in S-Scale that the last second generation locomotive that's commercially available right now that's not brass is a GP35.
Okay.
Then there's another commercially available engine that's the SD60. Yep. Everything in between there is missing. So that's a lot of locomotives. And so you have to get very creative with thank God 3D printing came around, because without that, we'd probably still be struggling to put things together to try to make it acceptable, but GP38-2 for a locomotive. And as far as a car goes, don't want to step on Ben's thing, because his car is really, really cool. So I would say like a 50-foot high cube box car would be really, really cool. Single and double torque.
That might actually get me into S scale if they had 50-foot high cubes.
I know you're
knows,
like
I love my 50-foot high cubes.
Yes, you do. I got 100 of them. You can come and look at if you want.
That's great. That's great. Hey, that's awesome. But so I think that, like you said, the 3D printing kind of is elevated at HO scale and N scale, actually, really, and it's kind of kicked in for all scales and made it a lot easier for everybody.
What a great technology, hey?
Yeah.
What an amazing piece of technology. I mean, who'd have thought that 5 years ago?
Yeah.
The heck with going back 10, 20 years, 5 years ago. Who'd have thought you'd be able to sit at your desk and be on the computer and create something on the computer and then spit it out 5 feet away from you? You know, that was unheard of. Right. You know, it was just, that was something that was only thought of in heavy industrial commercial applications. Right. So
and now you can have it sitting right on the desk next to your computer.
I got mine. Mine's right over here.
Yeah, there you go. Right next to in the second section studio, or the one of the second section studios.
One of them, yeah.
And let's talk a bit about the podcast, because you know we've got a great working relationship. We've had Andy on the show here recently, and we talked a little bit about the start of the Second Section podcast. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the podcast and kind of how you and Andy got together and created this podcast. It's a podcast video show, right? It's like kind of the best of both worlds kind of tied together.
Yeah, I kind of like to think of it like we are the live color broadcast of a baseball game. You know, you have an option. You can either listen to it on radio or you can watch it on TV.
Yeah,
we're the TV guys. You know, that's what we are. We're the TV guys. Andy and I kind of met. I want to say we met through a mutual friend, Luke Lemons, at one point. Somewhere down the lines, we met before we kind of got into being on podcasts, but they didn't really do a whole lot. But then we got on A Modeler's Life, but together, and from there, our friendship really kind of took off. We really started kind of hitting it off and everything, and every so often, either Andy would bring it up or I would bring it up, and he'd be like, "Hey, do you want to start our own show?" And be like, "Sure, yeah, why not?" And then that would be it for like 6 months,
Yeah.
and then he'd just, "Hey, do you remember we talked about doing that podcast thing?" Yeah. You want to try that again? Sure. That'd be another 2 months, whatever. So eventually, that went on for a while. And then eventually Andy just kind of, "Hey, do you remember, do you still want to do that podcast thing?" I said, "Absolutely." He goes, "Okay, well, I think what it was is the technology and the availability of platforms really broadened. And there were more available that were on a more of a free server basis than, because it used to be a little expensive to kind of do this kind of stuff. I mean, it was a little pricey,
Yep.
And eventually Andy and I just kind of said, "Yeah, the heck with it. Let's go and try this." And we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. I look back, and if I go back to that very first Second Section podcast and look at that, oh my goodness, is that rough? That is some rough stuff. And the flow is so much better now, and our technology has gotten better. And, I'd like to think that the quality of the hosts have gotten better, and we just have a blast with it. It like, we like to kind of think about it like, we're the kind of the how-to guys, right? I guess is like your show is more of the who and the what and kind of thing, and we're kind of the how, the who, the what, and the why, and we're kind of the how kind of guys. We're okay, well, you can talk about doing it this way, but here's how you can do it, and here's how this stuff, and we have some stuff. We've got a couple of things up our sleeve that we're going to start diving a little more into the how, and doing doing a little bit more as far as showing how to do things rather than just talking about how to do things.
Well, one of the good examples is last night you guys talked to Marty McGurk, and he was recently on this podcast. And, the conversation Marty and I had was more about the trip to New London, where he got to see not only the submarines and the Navy, he got to see Central Vermont, and he got to learn all that, and, kind of his why of doing the Central Vermont and what brought him into model railroading. And then you guys got on there and you're talking about, his scenery, the wire spun trees and all that other really detailed stuff that he got on. And you got to really dive into his how. And so it really both really complemented each other well. And that's what's really neat about this space. And it bodes well. The how bodes so well for you guys in that video aspect, because you got to see. I mean, we could talk the hobby all day long, and I could kind of give you some, audio instructions on how to make something. But to see it, that tangible, see it, and go over it, especially some of the guests you've had, like Boomer, that stuff you have to see.
Oh yeah, I mean, I never in 1,000 years thought I'd ever consider Boomer a friend of mine. I always thought he'd be one of those guys that would be just out of arm's reach, and kind of like the Alan McClellan kind of people, and stuff like that. And all of a sudden and now it's like, well, hey Boomer, here's I have this idea. What do you think of this?
Right.
Now that's not going to work very well doing it that way. You try doing it this way. And it, and the thing is we can take that knowledge and bring it back into the show.
Yeah.
Andy doing those segments, building all those trees and everything is wire spun trees and for his scenes that he's doing, and me with that warehouse that I did and painting the warehouse and like when we talked to Marty McGurk, I was just blown away at the fact that his layout's on IKEA shelves.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, why didn't I think of that?
Sure.
Now I'm mad, because, I'm not mad at Marty for having the idea. I'm mad because I didn't come up with it. It's a great idea, but the show is really it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And, people seem to like it.
Oh, you got a great following. And one of the other things that I think is really great about the Second Section podcast and what really sets it apart is the interactive aspect, being live, and you have people sending comments in, a little banter fun in the chat room. And boy, did I have a lot of fun when you guys put Paul Kassar on there, my executive producer here, and I was sending in, all my really bad Australian jokes, and it was just that really neat interactive. Hey, I'm sending something to somebody on my computer screen, and they're responding. There's just something really neat about that.
That was a fun show.
Yeah,
I mean, they're all fun, but Paul Kassar is such a good guy, and a good modeler, and but boy, what a great personality. I mean, it's just he's truly one of the good ones there for sure.
Absolutely. And one of the segments that I want to make sure we bring up, we mentioned earlier, and it's one of the best, if not maybe your best, other than, you got great interviews and everything else and, the how-tos, but the short line of the show really, to me, is an ingenious segment of your show. I want you to talk a little bit about its development and then kind of its purpose.
Okay, as far as the short line of the show goes, the development came around where Andy and I were talking one day, and he was kind of spitballing ideas out. And I said, hey, why don't we do a segment where we kind of talk about a railroad? And I said, why don't we just make it like a short line? And he goes, ooh, that's a good idea. And I'm like, oh, crap, that means it's my idea. I got to take care of it, right? Yep. And he says, yeah. So it kind of like, I started to put out a thing. I'm like, okay, there's 50 states in the United States. there's got to be a short line in every one of them that we can talk about. Well, let's start in alphabetical order. Just because we're in Wisconsin doesn't mean we have to only focus on Wisconsin railroads.
Right.
Let's go around the country, because model railroading is all over the world, and let's start showing these. So Alabama Export Railroad was the very first one that we did.
Yep.
And it, again, we go back to I look at it and, oh my goodness, that very first one, kind of a little rough, but it really turned out to be kind of a catalyst, because we got such good response from it about, I never knew that even existed.
Yeah.
And trying to tie in, the premise of it is this: showing a short line that you can reasonably model. Marty McGurk made a really good comment last night. He talked about achievability. Where he's making a railroad building a railroad that is achievable, and not making it so huge that you'll never get past the plywood stage, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the purpose behind the short line of the show, is to highlight railroads that you could model in an achievable sense, or inexpensive, or take segment of it and create something really, really kind of neat. And so that's kind of the purpose behind the whole short line of the show, is to just shed light on things that you don't normally see or hear about. I mean, we've done really, I should say we. Andy will say it's all me, but I always say we. We've done an electric coal railroad. We've done railroads from the past. The one thing I do not want to do, not yet, I will eventually do this, and is Genesee and Wyoming, any of the big, Watco, any of the conglomerate railroad, short line railroad holding companies.
Sure.
I was staying away from those. These are all independent railroads that we're doing.
Yeah.
And so it really just sheds light on something modelers can take, and if somebody gets inspired by one of them, then a segment is very well worth it, and people seem to really like it. So,
and it seems to be right up your alley. You mentioned earlier about your desire to do that deep research, slip down the rabbit hole and really do that kind of digging, and it seems like that comes out with that short line of the show segment.
It's not helping at all.
It's just adding to it, huh?
Well, what a beautiful thing about it is our viewers / listeners, they're helping a lot. I bet you I've got a list of 8 or 10 railroads that, for states that we got coming up, that I'm going to start doing research on and stuff, that are coming from people giving suggestions. Hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? And eventually it turns out to be really helpful.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you get writer's block.
Yeah.
You can't think of everything sometimes, and it's like, do you do this, or you get a state that's got like 40 of them in there, and you got to pick one.
Yeah, narrow it down.
And so you have to narrow it down, and then you get a state that doesn't have hardly anything, and it's like, well, I guess that's easy.
Yep. Well, I threw one in for a neighboring state. I'm gonna see if it makes it when we get down to that latter part of the alphabet. It'll be interesting to see. So,
come to find out, that most likely will, seeing as how it's that state's only short line railroad.
It might have just it would be hard when it comes back around the second time. You might have to just do more on it. But great segment, really good. And and I said this to Andy when I had him on, and we talk a lot offline, and the collaboration between our podcasts, and even with the Crossing Gate podcast and those guys, between Tom Geisher and Ken Zeska, and to be able to, all of us communicate and share ideas and talk about guests and who would be good for who. And, it really is it's a great thing. We're all trying to just have a lot of fun doing these podcasts, getting people on, sharing stories, sharing the how-tos, just trying to provide a service to the community. And we've created kind of our own community within that to help support that.
Yeah,
so
we have.
it's really cool. And we, the late night chats that we've had, and it's just been a blast. So I appreciate you guys for it, and I think I'm just excited to see Second Section grow, and see who else you bring on, and the information that you share. Really, really.
I couldn't have asked for you couldn't match people up better than Andy and I don't think. We definitely we complement each other, and yet we're different enough to where I learn things from him all the time and he learns things from me all the time. So it's not like we're so similar that anything we don't get in each other's way. His stuff is his stuff, my stuff is my stuff, and he'll push me a little ways one time and I'll push him a little ways one time, and same with Tom and Ken. Those guys do the same kind of thing up there, and I forgot to mention Heath over at Humanity Junction. The whole group, and your show is awesome. So it's I've actually listened to every single one of them, by the way. So
that's good. You're all caught up, and then
I'm all caught up.
And hopefully by the time this airs and you're listening to this right now, you're all caught up, but yeah, and you go back to that and you talk about your earlier podcasts, and I know my earlier podcast, every time we do a show, and I know that's got to be the same for you guys, you just learn something new about the podcasting space, about interviewing people or asking questions. It's just as much as, learning the model railroading hobby. This is an entire hobby upon itself that you really just keep learning every time.
It really is. And this is one of those things, it's just like model railroading. You can put as much time and effort into it as you really want, and the more time and effort you put into it, the better the quality comes out, right? Sure. So it's like the hobby within the hobby, so to speak.
Well, you guys went and swung for the fences with a live show. I laugh. I mentioned it multiple times. You guys are, a brave set of guys to just say, okay, let's turn it on and let's see what happens. And when I turn it on and see what happens, it was me doing mock shows, and I bring my best friend on and kind of thing, or and just yak away with him for a while, and okay, that works and that doesn't work. And my buddy Dave Gardner from the Digital Dice podcast, him and I spent so much time, just doing like mock interviews, and he'd like pretend to be like the worst guest ever. He'd be like one-word answers, and like he would challenge me, and I would learn it that way. Not you guys. You just go flip the switch. All right, hi everybody, welcome to the Second Section podcast. I'm Andy.
Well, it's like wow. Our first couple were actually recorded. Yeah, our first handful were recorded. And then all of a sudden, I think Andy one day said, hey, do you want to try doing it live? I'm like, sure. Yeah. He goes, really? I'm like, sure. Why not?
I knew it was either in the beginning or very early on. You do it today, and I go on lives, and even for the 10 or 15 minutes I do a live, and I'm like, oh crap, did I hit the right button? I've had the wrong microphones on. I'm like, I am not meant for a live podcast. I'm meant for record it a few weeks ahead of time, go back, make sure everything works right. Yeah, but you guys are brave souls, and
we do like a pre-show. We do a pre-show though. I mean, we do like, usually the day before, because that way we can work out any audio bugs or any kind of technical things. We can take the time to work those out prior to, and then that way there's only 400 things to go wrong instead of 4,000 things to go wrong.
Right. Yeah, there's a little preparation definitely helps with everything. That's for sure.
Or if we're in Luke Lemon's basement trying to do a live show and there's a thunderstorm that cuts the power out. I mean, that's one of the funnier ones that we've ever done. I'm sitting there with that little fishing rod, sitting there doing this, trying to pretend I'm fishing, and it's.
That's great.
It was, yeah. So, yeah, thank you. It's fun. We have a lot of good stuff up on the horizon, and Andy knocks it out of the park. He does the majority of the show prep, so that's we really appreciate everybody that watches and listens, and that's couldn't ask for a better fan base and better friends in the podcast world. So it's awesome.
Absolutely, for sure. So anybody that hasn't checked it out already, you can check out Second Section Podcast on their YouTube channel. We'll provide all the links in the show notes here. Check out their website, secondsectionpodcast.com. And remember, all the hate mail about the S-Scale HO stuff goes to secondsectionpodcast@gmail.com. Don't confuse, just send it right over to secondsectionpodcast@gmail.com. Put in the subject line, attention Andy, and make sure that
attention Andy Dorsch. That's exactly what it has to be.
He will console every single person who was insulted tonight by Mike's comments on
that's
HO
going
scale.
to be a running tally, I think. So
Mike, we're at our hour mark here, and a little bit over. We ran a little overtime tonight, which was good. Got to talk about that, but we're going to have you back on. We're going to want to talk about operations in the Farlin terminal, and we didn't really even get a chance to talk about your current layout, but we'll have you back on here very soon, and we'll have that chat. But for now, thanks for being a part of the Around the Layout podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.